Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal. Earlier today, I spoke to former US Green Beret and mercenary Jordan Goudreau, who led the failed Operation Gideon plot to invade Venezuela in 2020 by sea and topple the government of Nicolás Maduro. It was a famously bungled operation that is mockingly referred to as the Bay of Piglets. And if you've been following our coverage at the Grayzone for the past few years, especially our coverage of Venezuela, then you're very well familiar with the details of it. Jordan Goudreau is treated as almost a laughing stock in US media. But as I've recently learned, there's a lot more to the story. Goudreau is currently facing federal arms trafficking charges for transferring arms over the Colombian border. And he's now come forward to tell me in the Grayzone his side of the story. He's provided us with extremely valuable court documents and FBI files containing details of those who were involved in the covert 2020 Operation Gideon plot to topple the government of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. These documents provide details of the Venezuelan coup plan that the public has never seen before. They include FBI interviews with participants, which demonstrate foreknowledge, or at least suggest foreknowledge of the plot by Trump associates, leaders of the government of Colombia, CIA assets, and officials working directly under Vice President Mike Pence and Donald Trump, and strongly suggest their support for it. And in this interview, Goudreau names these officials and also details potential CIA support for the plot. Jordan Goudreau, former Green Beret and the face of Operation Gideon, which began as Operation Edgemont. Welcome to the Grayzone.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate it.
Jordan, you currently face arms trafficking charges from the US government stemming from your involvement in Operation Gideon, which was this high profile attempted coup in Venezuela that's colloquially referred to as the Bay of Piglets. It was sort of a mercenary operation gone wrong, at least on the face of it. But as a result of your trial, you have gained access to documents that the public has never seen before that you say demonstrate that US officials, Trump administration officials, and figures close to the Trump administration and the CIA knew about Operation Edgemont, which was the plan to invade Venezuela and arrest the country's president, Nicolás Maduro. And at the center of the story is a firm called Global Governments. I want you to talk about what Operation Edgemont is and tell us about the role of global governments, who was involved in that group, and what were their objectives.
Yeah, so let me just take it one step at a time. So the operation in of itself, I didn't, there's a lot of media and individuals and bad actors and whatnot. When the narrative came out, they were talking about how I was trying to find a way to flip Venice. I wasn't. Keith Schiller came to me, global governments came to me. I didn't even know there was an initiative to do such a thing. Obviously, back then, the Trump administration had been pushing for the CIA to find a way to get Maduro out. They were dragging their feet. This is evidenced by there's a great Wired article, well sourced, several CIA, case officers were sources on that article. But essentially, I get tasked to do this op. And ultimately, when you look at the the very first email I sent out to the global governance team, which is in the discovery, there's obviously a ton of discovery that's come out. I even outlined that this will not be a bloody thing. This will be Venezuelans basically, retaking their own country. And so I think my strategy and certainly my intent for this op was to have Venezuelans take back their own country, right? And the way you do this, it's nuanced. I get it. On the surface, and the narrative is always going to be, wow, this was a coup. These dirty mercenaries with it. This was not the plan. It was not the initial plan, and it was never the plan. And obviously, to do something like this, it's actually called a military coup. And so you use units close to um, the president, well, or the leadership in Venezuela. At that point, it was three different leaders. It was Maduro, Cabello, and Tariq. And you develop access and placement to those leaders who have access maneuver unit or task maneuver units. So these units you align yourself with through the asset, whether it's a general or whoever has access, and these individuals do the heavy lifting. Now, several factors made that possible. Although it took me about a year and a half to get access and placement, the fact that the all the pressure that was on the Maduro regime at the time was considerable. There was sanctions. There was, launching of a carrier or a destroyer group, much like there is now. There was, tremendous amount of saber rattling in the news. There were popular rebellions, all such, all of this designed to put pressure on the Maduro regime. I was able to, like I said, get access to these individuals because they were afraid. And I think the audience needs to understand that there's a tipping point when it comes to flipping a country. People surrounding a tyrannical leadership aren't going to want to. It's not an easy decision for them to make to betray that leader simply because they have families. And so if it's mistimed and they stay close to that tyrannical leader, and another country comes in and a coup is successful, then those individuals will be treated just as badly by the incoming element as the target, which would have been, obviously Maduro, Cabello, Tariq. And so it's really difficult to get support. Now, obviously, when Mike Pompeo shut down the embassy in Caracas, it was virtually impossible for the CIA to run any meaningful human intelligence operations, which means they would have done what I did, which is just gained access placement and loyalty among, Maduro, Cabello, and Tariq's generals or whomever. They would have done the same thing, but the fact that Pompeo shut that embassy down made it impossible for the CIA. I didn't know at the time back then, but there was a civil war in the White House. You can evidence, I mean, that's evidenced by the Russia collusion hoax stuff and all of the evidence that's come out on that, and then the Obama with undermining, the Trump administration, as well as, I mean, the FBI were tapping Senator Hawley's cell phone. So there's these, back then there were a lot of games being played, trade crafty kind of games that were being played in the White House that I don't believe that the Trump administration was privy to. They weren't aware of the level of scrutiny and I guess battle that they were under. But it's pretty clear now. And so, I mean, when I look at the 302s more and more, and when I look at the discovery, it's more evident that this was the case. It's just proves what I have, I guess, been saying since the first discovery drop. And I mean, there are several discovery drops coming, every month or so, which are spaced apart for, I guess, the reason of time and distance. I mean, that plays to the hand of the government. But I think that's a very weighty macro standpoint. Does that answer any of your questions, Max?
Uh, not not exactly. I mean, I wanted you to talk about global governments and what it was and who
Sure.
was involved in it and where they fit into this plot. So maybe thanks for that
So,
macro perspective, but this is sort of the
yeah,
as AOC, this would be the micro to the macro, as
sure. So
AOC would say.
let's drill down in one of the interested parties, yeah, of
Yeah.
which there are obviously you have the intelligence community folks with the FBI and the DEA and Venezuelan opposition folks, and then you have the element, like my team, that was trying to actually do the work, as being, hired by and directed by the Trump administration. And then the third component is the global governments. These are the guys who hired me. Their intent or their piece in this was they wanted business contracts, and so they wanted a way to monetize, I suppose, the aftermath of a Maduro-free Venezuela. So they
Basically, to
had,
exploit Venezuela's resources and get construction contracts and drilling
yes, right,
contracts and so on.
correct, right. Drilling, mining, as you know, Venezuela is resource rich. Also, it needs to be reconstructed, humanitarian efforts, things of that nature. So global governments would have had the contract for all of this. I was brought in because the big hurdle to this was the fact that Venezuela was still under the control of Maduro, the Maduro regime, and they needed somebody to remove him.
Right. In order to get that wealth, they needed you to remove him.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And so you have Rowan Kraft, who was a senior advisor to global governments, who was an heir to the Kraft family fortune. And you have Keith Schiller, who was close to the Trump organization. I guess he was Trump's bodyguard. What was his role? Who were these figures?
So Key Schiller, I mean, it's funny that he's the bodyguard. He was the head of White House operations, right? So
And sorry
if
to interrupt, but he had an arms export control license, correct?
he did, right,
Okay.
absolutely. And so he was a head of White House operations, I think, until, I don't know, 2018 or something. And then, and this is kind of, it's that position is a pretty heavy title. Key Schiller basically could come and go to the White House anytime he wanted. He's a very respected figure in the Trump administration. And so he approached me. I guess he learned some of the other work I had done through maybe a mutual acquaintance. And so he contacted me and asked me to come to a meeting, which I agreed to. Um, Rowan Kraft, head of the Kraft dynasty, is a well-connected guy. I mean, he was making phone calls to Admiral Fowler, who was Southcom commander. This was
Wow.
in the very first meeting. He was, I mean, you can read about all this in the Discovery. He made a phone call to Elliot Abrams, which, as it stands, I mean, one of the Venezuelan opposition people who worked for Leopoldo Lopez had a meeting with Elliot Abrams in the White House,
Right.
as did he have a meeting, several meetings. There were several, these individuals I was dealing with on a first name basis and, coming up with tactical operations and strategic operations were Venezuelan opposition guys. These guys seem to have the run of the White House. They were able to have their some of their compatriots like Christopher Figueroa taken off the sanctions list. Christopher Figueroa is the head of this was the head of the Sabine. He was a torturer, and yet, he was given complete clean slate. I think Forbes did an article on him and said this is a real Venezuelan, and I talked to people who he had tortured. So these guys were greased in with Mike Pompeo, Elliot Abrams, John Bolton, all of these DC power players, and I was in Colombia with these guys trying to figure it out. But don't let me go too far down the rabbit hole, Max. You're
Well,
gonna
well,
have to.
let's drill this down. So Nestor Science, this is someone who shows up in the discovery documents that I've reviewed. What role did he play in this? Because I believe he was the one who introduced you to global governments and promised to connect you to Elliot Abrams and John Bolton, who were in the White House about the plot.
Yeah, so Nestor put me in touch with global governments. He was in the room in the very first meeting, as was um, it was George Betancourt, who was obviously he's the guy,
Jorge Betancourt was
yeah, he was
Venezuelan,
Leopoldo
a
Lopez.
Venezuelan sort of expat
Right,
opposition activist, right? And
right.
said he had contacts in the CIA.
Yeah, so he was meeting frequently with the CIA. He was meeting with the Colombian intelligence, the DN, Colombian DNI, and he would speak freely about it. So he was an asset for these intelligence agencies. He was in the room the very first meeting in I guess it was Miami, as was global governments, who were basically an envoy for the Trump administration to try to get this, the ball rolling on this entire thing. And so you had this setup. You had these two entities, right? You had this intelligence community, and um, you had the global governments guys, and then you had my team in the middle. So.
And so your team was basically the muscle. You were going to kick in the doors and get it done. And
No, I mean, maybe metaphorically, but I'm not interested in invasion. That would be an Eric Prince. If that was, and I had seen his prospectus and his, what he was kind of trying to sell at that point. And that was invasion. I
yeah.
didn't,
So Eric
most of
Prince from
the,
Blackwater, who's very close to
right,
Trump Incorporated, was furnishing a prospectus and trying to raise money for an armed invasion of Venezuela, and you saw it.
right. And so, yeah. And I think that I am, about half of my training in special operations is human intelligence. Quite frankly, I mean, we learn it very early on. We learn to work by, with, and through people on the ground. And so, I'm not interested in banging it out with Venezuelan regulars, right? Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose. And so, the idea is I'm going to use Venezuelan units in order to encircle and capture Maduro, Tariq, and Diosdado.
Tariq
And that,
al-Assami, Diosdado
right,
Cabello,
correct.
and Nicolas Maduro.
Correct. You need Caracas. I mean, if Chavez taught us anything with his first coup, it was you need Caracas. And to be perfectly honest, this was a triumvirate. It was Cabello, and it was Tariq, and it was Maduro, right? And so to be perfectly clear, I didn't care if anybody was captured. I just wanted these guys out. I wanted to get my guys in. So that I could bring about fair and free elections. In the interim, there would have been a junta, which would have had, Guaido and a few others in there just to bring about these fair and free elections. And that was kind of that was the intent that I personally had going forward.
Um, and so, John, you're telling me that John Bolton and Elliot Abrams knew about Operation Edgemont, your plot, which would become Operation Gideon, and they had some involvement in it. I mean, can we can you be as clear as possible about that and how high this went?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty obvious that Elliot Abrams was contacted by Rowan Kraft. He was also having meetings with the Venezuelan opposition strategic, I guess, leadership in George Betancourt, which, to be honest, you can't find his name in the news anywhere. It's well protected. That said, I mean, it's I've read it, and so because of that, you have National Security Advisor who knows full well that this is happening, and then you have obviously Mark Esper who alludes to this in his book. He alludes to a meeting between Claver Cardones, which again, Claver Cardones met with George Betancourt. And so when you have these high level national security advisors meeting with delegations from other countries, and these delegations are talking to me and Trump's inner circle about, you know, liberating or flipping, whatever you want to say, Venezuela, it is at that point there is no denying the fact that this was at the highest levels of government and that there were opposing views on what was going to be done with this operation.
And you mentioned Leopoldo Lopez as well. He is sort of the godfather of the putschist arm of the Venezuelan opposition, the part of the Venezuelan opposition that wants to stage a military coup. He had actually been involved in a military coup. He's heavily backed by the government of Spain and the US government. And you said that he had some knowledge of this plan as well.
Oh. Absolutely. So his man is George Betancourt. His other man is Lester Toledo. And these guys were greased in with the US intelligence, Colombian intelligence. And furthermore, they were greased in with the Rendon group, which not to be confused with J.J. Rendon, but I think they call it
Yeah, John Rendon, right?
TRG. Yeah, TRG, the Rendon group. And these guys they had been doing infrastructure attacks or helping facilitate infrastructure attacks in Venezuela for I don't know, decade or so. And obviously, as you know, these are all TSSCI projects that the CIA oversees in these private companies. Anytime you see the lights go out in Venezuela, I think there was a big nuclear reactor sorry, a um,
It
a
was the dam,
refinery.
the it was a hydroelectric dam that went out in, I believe, 2019 and caused
I think
power
it
outages across Caracas.
there was, but there was something else, Max. It was a big attack, and it killed a lot of Venezuelans. So,
Tell me about
anyways,
that.
yeah. So these about the I don't know that it was in Maracaibo. I'm getting this wrong, but it was a refinery that was attacked.
Yeah, that's correct.
You know, tens of ten. I don't know the number of how many Venezuelans were killed, but this attack was perpetrated by U.S. intelligence working with Venezuelan opposition. I guess you could say saboteurs. Um, so look,
And
there's a
go
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, there's a longstanding history of the CIA working, and I have a secret recording with the God, it's George Betancourt, Lester Toledo, with there's a guy that I had to take a secret recording. They were talking about how they don't trust Donald Trump and that they only trust the CIA, they only trust Juan Cruz. And it's plain as day about the allegiance, where the allegiances are to these individuals. They're not aligned with Trump. They're aligned against Trump. And I think, if I may, like fast forwarding now, when you look at the dynamic with Maria Corina, how does the Trump administration trust any of the opposition leadership for Venezuela? So you have a very detached um, relationship between these individuals. So, and I think the media narrative on all of this has been you obviously there's an individual who writes for the AP who's been gunning for me for a long time, and he comes up with his word choice is pretty careful. He talks about tacit approval. There was no tacit approval. There are no bones about it. I was tasked to do this. I was given verbal authority to do this by several parties who were working for the government. Um, but I do think that when you look at when you peel back the layers and you simplify it, there are sides to this, and the sides are quite clear.
Yeah. When which side, what are the sides?
You have an intelligence community that has been obviously, I mean, I saw your reporting the other day in the 90s, Cartel de Solis was stood up by the CIA. This is no secret. I mean, this is the truth. I mean,
This is the
we talk,
cartel which Nicolás Maduro is said to be in charge of, but may be actually defunct. And you're confirming that it was set up by the CIA in the 90s.
oh, absolutely. This is not, we've known this for quite some time.
According to what the former head of the Drug Enforcement Administration told Mike Wallace, this drug shipment got here courtesy of what he calls drug trafficking by the CIA in partnership with the Venezuelan National Guard.
Um,
Yeah.
the Cartel of the Suns is kind of a joke among us because it's, I mean, they didn't name themselves that. There's a patch on their uniform that there's a sun, and so I guess the DEA or whoever named them this. But the facilitation of the drugs by the CIA from this group it's well documented. And so you have this side of it, right? You have an intelligence agency that, quite frankly, they will withstand changes in presidency, and so they have their TSSCI projects running, and their ability to facilitate and to aggregate resources from drug trade. And this is what they're trying to protect. So how does it benefit them to get rid of Nicolas Maduro, right? Like it really doesn't. You can argue, well, Monroe Doctrine, you have to have white space in Venezuela and surrounding areas of the Caribbean so that Russia, China can't get a strategic foothold. But um, the other side of the coin is, and this is obviously what the Trump administration is this is one of the reasons they're pressuring the Maduro regime, and were back then, or at least they should be. They should be falling back on the Monroe Doctrine. I know that largely they're relying on the fact that Venezuela is a narco state, but that's the irony, right? I mean, okay, Venezuela is a narco state, but their partner is the CIA. Is it? I mean, um, I don't know how to square that, right?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is it's more of a petro state and responsible for only a fraction of cocaine exports to the United States. But it seems to be, and this is, I think, extraneous to our conversation, or we can kind of cover it later, but just for the purpose of context, it seems to be a target because of its oil wealth and its socialist oriented sort of nationalist resource government being targeted under cover of a drug war. There's an official actually who's been involved in the targeting of Venezuela for years who operated out of the State Department, but seems to wear a different hat, potentially a hat at Langley, and his name is Juan Cruz, and he's come up in the discovery documents through your case. Can you tell us about Juan Cruz, who he is, and how he fits into this story?
Yeah, so Juan Cruz was the go-to for George Betancourt and Lester Toledo. He was, as far as I know, he was their guy, like the face of the intelligence agency for these two individuals, which would have really made him their handler. They referenced him by name, and he had some strange things to say about me when he was interviewed after the fact, after all this went down, and so. He is one of the other evidences of U.S. intelligence involvement or sabotage.
You're saying Juan Cruz was operating under State Department cover as a CIA handler of these two Venezuelan opposition figures who were seeking to sort of finesse a private regime change operation.
Right.
Jorge, George Betancourt, and Lester Toledo.
Correct. What capacity he was working for the agency is unknown to me, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that he was a knock or some other, form of agent. Obviously, Juan Cruz, he's
Yeah,
been around for a while. He has deep connections.
indeed. So Lester Toledo introduced you to this Venezuelan general who's a very shady character who was controversial. Like Toledo and Betancourt didn't like him. His name is Cliver Alcala, correct?
Correct.
And you
Correct.
wound up working with him in the jungle in Colombia, sort of to stage the invasion or intervention in Venezuela with Alcala and his men who were you know, rebelling against the Venezuelan military.
Right. Right. And so this general was trusted by a lot of the generalship in Venezuela. Juan Guaido was not at all.
Yeah.
This is why the popular rebellion failed miserably. They did not have the support of the military. And yeah, Juan Guaido had the support of the CIA, and they were helping with that little, April 19th thing, but they did not have the support of the military. As a result, this was in complete contrast to what I had set up. As a result, it failed. And so the difference for my op was that I had essentially access and placement, and I had assets who trusted the general. They tolerated the fact that I was working with Guido, but they did not trust Guido. They did, however, trust General Alcala. General Alcala was a strong opponent of Nicolás Maduro. Um, Checkered past, sure. That said, he was from and I had the opportunity to ops test him for about a year, and he showed no signs of deception. He never lied to me, and his part of the operation really was. And this is the nuance of when you're putting together an operation like this. I don't need everybody to be playing in the sandbox nicely together, but I do need certain pieces not to attack other pieces. And in this instance, when the United States arrested General Alcala, you can imagine the fallout in Caracas with my assets, my trusted assets. The man that they trusted was now getting taken by the United States, and there were a lot of questions they had in their minds. It made them fearful. You remember before when I talked about how people close to Maduro were fearful? I mean, you know, we were bombing Iranian generals back then. We were saber rattling, but they were fearful. They were fearful if Maduro left power, they wanted to be on the right side of things. Anybody in that position who's in a position of power in the orbit of somebody who's a target wants to be on the right side when something unfolds, if something unfolds. And if it doesn't, then they still need to have the loyalty of that person who's targeted, this case, Maduro. Does that make sense? And so
Yeah.
it's
So you were working with Alcala in Colombia at a time when Colombia had a very pro-US government that was working with all of the US agencies, Pentagon, CIA, DIA, all that stuff, under Ivan Duque. Now Colombia's
yeah,
government, at least the president is a leftist, Gustavo Petro, but at that time, Colombia was sort of a base of operations against Venezuela. I interviewed Nicolas Maduro. He told me, the Colombian government was heavily involved in plotting with John Bolton an attempt on his life, the drone attack. So
yes.
what kind of contacts did you have with the Colombian government and what role did they play in Operation Gideon?
So I had phone call, which was brokered by Lester Toledo. Ivan Duque basically promises for this operation like camps and freedom of movement and then border ability to cross borders, things of that nature. The caveat being that we had to attack the ELN, right? And this was a very strange request for me.
Big
It was kind
caveat.
of, yeah, it was strange. It was like, I don't know that I never really was going to, I was never going to do it was kind of ridiculous. Anyways, Ivan Duque, I went on W radio and Ivan Duque, I said this on W radio and Ivan Duque called into W radio. W radio is probably the largest radio station in all Latin America. It's you know, tens million, or sorry, hundreds of millions of listeners. And
Yeah.
I'm in Miami, film like we're taping, and I say this, and Ivan Duque calls into the studio, and he says, "I don't know. I've never met Lester Toledo. I've never met, any of these people. I don't know this person. I don't know that person." And I promptly produced photos of Ivan Duque with, Lester Toledo, but just the fact that a president would call into a radio station and he felt that strongly about it was, I think that was,
When was this interview?
oh, I think it was about a year ago.
Okay. Yeah, Ivan Duque is now a sort of like a club DJ in Miami. So he's probably listening at the time.
Oh yeah. And so here's, I guess, the nuance of the Ivan Duque sort of piece of it. Ivan Duque was the president, and he was aligned with Juan Guaido, Leopoldo Lopez, CIA, and obviously Colombian intelligence.
Yeah.
When everything went bad, Colombian intelli there was a Colombian intelligence, there were two Colombian intelligence operatives who went into the AOB in Bogota, and they had asked the green suitor compatriots, the PSYOPs green suitors, American green suitors who were working, they asked if the green suitors would help them do a PSYOP against me, to which the green suitors said, no, we don't do that against Americans, American citizens. But and one of the other small pieces to this, not a small piece, the shell game with all of the guns and all of these things. When the individual was arrested at a checkpoint and had I guess a trunk full of guns, there were two gentlemen in the back seat of the car. These two men were never identified. They were never interviewed. They basically left. The driver of the car, he ended up dying under mysterious circumstances a year later.
Wow.
So I think you can kind of imagine um, how that shakes out.
Wait. Give me the background on this incident.
This was in Colombia. Um, this was one of the first sabotage events that the Colombian intelligence, under the probably request from the US CIA slash, Betancourt, Toledo, whoever, they have these guys actually, do this. Um, this is when we're in our final corridor. Like my operation's imminent.
Yeah.
Um, this car is stopped at a checkpoint, and two men, military age males, as it's reported, they get out of the car. They are not, and there's a trunk full of guns. They are not arrested. They are not questioned. They are not identified. They go about their merry way. The driver dies in mysterious circumstances a year later. So, I mean, the
Yeah.
math on that is, you know,
They didn't want anyone talking.
right.
So you had some trouble with global governments, the coterie of businessmen and consultants who wanted to get a regime change op going in order to get contracts and resources out of Venezuela. They basically weren't paying you as you were doing the work. And so a figure named JJ Rendon enters the picture. He's sort of the super consultant for the Latin American pro US factions, the pro US, more like right of center, right wing political factions, very well paid person. And he comes forward with money for the contract. Juan Guaido's name is on this contract, which specified the goal of the operation to, quote, capture, detain, remove Maduro and the current regime from power and install Juan Guaido in its place. And you were offered a quote unquote success bonus of $10 million. And the total project cost was earmarked for something like, well, exactly $212.9 million. So was this the main source of funding for Operation Gideon? And did you ever receive the money from
No.
these figures?
Yeah. So, oh, sorry. Yeah. So Rendon, he essentially put a down payment. There was a retainer of 1.5 million. This essentially would have covered the first part of the operation, which was really just a link up. I had sent in um, an operative to do an OPE, an operational prep the environment, safe houses, you know, trucks, things of that nature. And this op was separate from the Gideon piece, right? This was kind of the op within the op. I had three boats ready to go to try to, do this. One was a civilian boat, different landfall locations, but coming back to it, I don't want to drill down too deep. It's a pretty
Yeah.
deep hole. So, yeah, so give me the initial question again, Max. Sorry.
Essentially, where did the money come from, and what was the role of Rendon
Right.
and Guaido?
So the initial price tag for a link up was would have been well covered in 1.5. Um, that said, I needed to know that these individuals were serious because global governments they weren't able to get the contract signed. Global governments remained, but it was now I got the contract signed, and so they were more working under my contract. I wasn't necessarily a massive services contract holder, but I did hold the contract with the sitting president. This was very interesting for Keith Schiller and all of global governments, to include Mike Pompeo's lawyer, Travis Lucas, George Sorial, Donald Trump's lawyer, everybody in this power circle in DC that I had met right after I got the contract signed. The money was, I mean, I'm a Green Beret at heart. I'm a special operations guy. I will find the money, and I'm a business guy. I have to be able to traverse the tactical, the strategic, the logistic, the business, the political layers of any operation like this. And so I put my, I had investors, and we were able to piece together what we needed to do in order to move the operation forward.
And did you have any contact with Guaido or
I
Rendon?
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely. I had several meetings with Rendon in Florida. He insists that there's things in the contract. He says in the contract it says that they could cancel any time, and but the contract clearly states that there's no cancellation for convenience. Furthermore, I never received an email to cancel any contract. I had a Zoom call. I recorded a secret phone call with Juan Guaido, and in that phone call, it's basically there's a lawyer who he facilitates the contract signing over Zoom, and you hear one guy to clearly signing the contract, several people in the room, and so I obtain the contract from the sitting president or the recognized president in Venezuela. At that point, I mean, when I took that, the next day I had a meeting with several powerful people in the the inner circle, the Trump's inner circle. After that contract was signed, a few hours later, I have this meeting in Trump Hotel, and then a few meetings after that, they have a meeting in the White House. So,
Wow. Okay,
yeah,
so speaking of the White House, you did have contact, according to these discovery documents, with the vice president's office. One name that comes up a lot is Drew Horn, who was a policy advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. And then you mentioned Travis Lucas, who was a lawyer working for Pence, and George Sorial, who was a lawyer for the Trump organization. And I think,
right.
yeah. So, how did you make contact with the vice president's office, and what did the contact consist of?
Yeah, so global governments, this is the part that's really funny to me, Max, when certain journalists try to claim that I'm claiming tacit approval. The discovery, um, the discovery says otherwise. There was several meetings with me and this individual. This individual is well connected in DC. Horn. He is obviously, if you look where he is now, he's working on a project with Keith Schiller in Greenland through GreenMath. I mean, these individuals are very close. Um, it's no secret that was one of the first initiatives that the administration started when they took office this time around. Um, Travis Lucas is a Mike Pompeo lawyer. George Sorial, as you said, is the Trump lawyer in charge of Trump Foundation, and so these guys are the very trusted individuals in the circle. Furthermore, they wanted not they, but one of those individuals wanted me to meet with the president, which I refused. I thought that was any president requires deniability. They require a certain level of distance from any operation of this. That said, I knew there was no doubt in my mind that I absolutely had approval to do this, that I was given the approvals by two individuals to do this. Um, and I'm a soldier as long as, we don't, the general doesn't have to come down and tell us, you're approved to the mission. We see, individuals working in that entity, and um, we believe it if it's credible. And these individuals were credible. I had no reason to not believe what they were saying.
They were credible and they were high level officials or connected to high level officials in an official capacity. And
Right, and it's not just that. It's when in the middle of this, I was sending several RFIs through this individual who these RFIs were reaching the highest levels, right? Because I was asking things like, I need to know if Juan Guaido has to, is he the guy? Because there's a lot of pushback on the fact, I was asking some very specific questions. Also, this individual who's working for the government was helping facilitate and get support for this operation. So the whole tacit that's like kind of ridiculous to me when I read the discovery.
and so there another group enters the picture uh late 2019 or I don't know exactly when, but it's called Virtual Democracy. And they were pitching plans to Drew Horn, who was the policy advisor for Mike Pence. It was sent to his one plan was sent to his White House email account on December 8th, 2019. And it basically spelled out ideas for toppling Maduro. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, there were several that individual was trying to find initiatives to get this done. When I first met with him,
Who are
he
you
was
talking about?
Horn.
Horn. Okay.
Horn. He was incredibly excited that somebody was working on this. Um, and I was obviously I was put in that position by global governments, but he was ecstatic, and so we worked together for several months to try to push this forward. He gave me, um, he relayed authorization at the highest level that this was authorized, and things like, we don't care how bloody it is. When this is done, the money will flow. This was the exact quote, right? It's like, so I felt I was in good hands. This guy, he was greased into the National Security Council. I didn't trust him. He was a Green Beret. I had no reason to think that he was not who he said he was, and he was who he said he was. Um, yeah,
We don't care how bloody it is. When it's done, the money will flow. That's an exact quote. Is that in writing somewhere?
no, that's not writing. That's
That's
just
something he told you verbally.
which to me, like I said before, I never want. For me, the more elegant the plan, the simpler the plan, the easier it is to defend the counter coup piece, right? If there's lots of war and strife, and if it's a invasion, a counter coup is tougher because you create a lot of hard feelings. If it is as simple and as elegant as Maduro's generals flipping because they see Americans and we are a force of catalyst, it's much more seamless. And what's more is it's not so much a coup, it's just a country um, taking control of its own agent, having agency of its own democratic process, I guess. Um,
And
the
and
moral
then,
implications of whatever.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying I know that there's a lot of heartache with, and I'm certainly not a proponent of invasion for the purpose of regime change, just for you know uh, exploiting resources. I do think that in the case of Venezuela back then, there a case could be made, and certainly having talked to a lot of the locals and spending time with individuals, I do think the case could be made that a strong case could be made that there was a justification for um, removing Maduro in favor of fair and free elections. That said, the way you do it is equally as important as the fact, and sometimes more important as what happens after the fact. Does that make sense? Like I would never invade a country and impose. Um, I think I think that's a slippery slope.
Well, this group Virtual Democracy was proposing that in the email that Drew Horn received at his official White House email account. They were calling for training up to 500 fighters at Camp Moyac in North Carolina, which is run by Eric Prince and his mercenary firm Academy, which used to be known as Blackwater. But that plan never went forward. Prince doesn't have anything in the works, to your knowledge.
Here's what I'll tell you about that. Like when you look at the strategic that and everything at the strategic briefs really well. I'm going to tell you that right now. When it comes down to the tactical level, 500 men versus a concentration of, say, oh, I don't know, 50,000 troops who have the run of a city, and pretty decent air support with their Sukhois versus Eric Prince's helicopters. I don't know that that would have ever scratched the paint. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Like the notion that I'm going to cowboy up with 60 dudes in fishing boats and somehow I'm going to E&E through, oh, I don't know, 100,000 regulars. We're going to, that's not realistic, right? What is realistic is what was supposed to happen, which was landfall of these two boats along the coast, low level operations, no skirmishing with the regular Venezuelan regulars, and then my civilian boat, making its way into a civilian marina in civilian clothes, meeting with, high level assets in Venezuela. That's an easy op, right? What Eric Prince was calling for, I just I don't see the viability of that. I don't know that it could have worked.
Well, I want to cover that just a little bit later, but first I want to ask you about another reference to the Operation Edgemont/Gideon plot, which took place during a meeting with Venezuelans' opposition and then Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, who ran the Pentagon for a period under the first Trump term. And in his memoirs, Esper said that one of Guaido's colleagues told him, quote, "We have some plans the US government knows we are working on that aren't ready yet." And Esper said he left the meeting after the plans were brought up. So, what do you make of Esper's admission? It seems to be the most high level admission of foreknowledge and possible involvement by the Trump administration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when I read through the discovery, it is painfully obvious that the intelligence community knew, National Security Council, everybody in those councils knew. Furthermore, my prosecution is really a cover-up. It's, the my prosecution was initiated from the national security component of the DOJ. Um, that component is run by a guy named John Eisenberg. John Eisenberg was placed in the initial Trump administration as national security advisor by Michael Flynn, General Flynn. John Eisenberg was National Security Council. He was in the White House at the time. Keith Schiller was in the White House. So these two individuals were working together. Um, I don't like where I come from. That's a conflict of interest, right? And although John Eisenberg did not initiate this prosecution, he certainly inherited it, and he certainly knows who I am. So
Yeah.
it's interesting stuff. I don't mean to get off track, but the connections in this are pretty alarming.
No, no, that is alarming, and I wasn't aware of it before. So John Eisenberg was, or he is the U.S. Assistant Attorney General for the NSC. He was appointed or installed in that position in June 2025, and you said he's overseeing your prosecution.
Right.
And before
Right.
that, he was deputy counsel to Donald Trump himself, and he was a legal advisor to the NSC in Trump's first term. So
Right.
he was around, he was in the room with people who you say had direct knowledge of your plot, and now he's trying to basically put you in the slammer to shut you up.
Right. Seems that way. Um, Furthermore, to go back to the room with Mark Esper,
Yeah.
the admission, because Claver Cardones was there, national security advisor back then and now, I believe. He was in the room, so it is not out of the realm of possibility that the individual that Mark Esper is talking about is George Betancourt, because George Betancourt had made similar statements to me, and that is in black and white. So that
George
is
Betancourt being someone you described as a CIA asset, someone who was
correct.
coordinating between the opposition and US intelligence.
Correct. Right.
And so you had these backers within global governments initially, then Rendon signs a contract with you. Did you have any potential backers for the day after in the event of a success that would seek Venezuelan resources and contracts in Venezuela the day after Maduro?
Yes, absolutely. This was global governments, right? And
Okay.
so once this moves forward, and then so the tranche of money, which was the promise by Horn, and I think you saw back then, I think the bounty was probably 15 million. And if I might, the that would have probably hit the account pretty quickly. The big fear of somebody like me is if obviously the if everything goes to plan and we are not sabotaged by the intelligence agency and the Venezuelan opposition. Maduro and his guys, they flee the country, captured whatever it is, but this is the point where in a coup where you have to defend against the counter coup. I needed men on the ground. I needed Americans on the ground. And this would be the security component. I needed armed Americans who were trained to a high level, special operations level, on the ground, 60 or so, in order to help defend against the counter coup.
Yeah.
Furthermore, these individuals would have worked by, with, and through the local militaries, the assets that I had previously described these individuals. So my men would have pieced into um, these units and essentially helped maintain law and order, um, and bring about fair and free elections in, I don't know, say a year or so, depending. Obviously, after humanitarian aid is restored, or is orders restored, humanitarian aid has been distributed.
Okay. It sounds like a harebrained scheme from my point of view. It sounds like it never had any chance of success. And you've described a potential larger operation of trained mercenaries in the US as something that wouldn't even scratch the paint of the
Right.
Venezuelan military, which is, fairly, they have some fairly well trained regulars. Caracas is encircled with various layers of security. There are air defenses. They have an air force. They're able to compete with the Colombian military. So why
Sure.
would you have thought that your operation would have succeeded? Why did you, in your own words, cowboy up with just a small detachment of men?
So I think you're missing it, Max. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I was doing. Do you understand?
Explain.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm saying is it would have been harebrained if, yeah, we go in with 60 dudes. That's not possible. This is the counter coup. Do you understand? We're in a different phase at this point.
Okay.
Hypothetically, right? So hypothetically, if my units are alerted, I make my link up, and Maduro's the high level assets activate Venezuelan regulars. These Venezuelan regulars now take care of Maduro, Cabello, and Tariq. These guys are now off the table, but there's an element of chaos, right? And so what I'm saying is, I now need to establish some semblance of order. I need to establish a junta. I need a leadership, a group of leaders that can govern a country without leadership. This is where I bring in 60 Americans just for security. They're not fighting anybody. They're basically tying in with Venezuelan regulars, and they're going to essentially work by with and through these regulars. The hard part's done, essentially. There's no fighting, right? Nobody's fighting anybody. Furthermore, we established this junta in order to bring about some semblance of leadership and fair and free elections. Does that you tracking?
Yeah. I mean, this is your theory on the operation and how it would
No.
ideally play out.
This is evidenced by, I mean, this is essentially what they did in Bolivia, right? And this is largely we're just there. We're not there to govern or do anything. We're not doing conducting military operations. We're working kind of like you're trained to do, right? In any, I guess, special operation capacity for a Green Beret, which is you train, advise, and assist, like the Iraqis, right? So in Iraq, Green Beret units will work by, with, and through Iraqi units. So in Venezuela, it would have been similar, but much easier because you have generals who have now removed Maduro, Tariq, and Cabello. Uh, a temporary leadership has been established. And so now we have to basically survive 3 months of potential counter coups. The way we do that is we essentially try to align the existing military under the temporary leadership.
Okay, and you're coming in on on fishing boats.
No,
You run into
these are different, Max. Those are a different group of people.
so how you were going to come in on land secretly and link up with
No,
some sort of
no,
rebellious
this is
generals.
so let's go back. Um, so the first part of the operation is a link up. This is the 60 people in boats, right? And then a small boat with Americans. The American contingent with some Venezuelans gets off in a marina, and it's basically just a link up. We're linking up with assets in Venezuela who have task and maneuver units, powerful people who are embedded with Maduro. Does that make sense?
I mean, it doesn't make sense to me because I've been to Venezuela several times and I kind of have seen a picture of the society that I don't think was well understood or is well understood by the US, which is that Maduro has a large base of support and that the
Does.
war for Venezuela is basically a class war. It's basically the middle class and the upper class want to oust Maduro, and then you have masses of people who literally weren't on the map before Maduro's predecessor, who was elected. He didn't just steal power. Hugo Chavez. They support him, and the military largely comes from that element and is supported despite heavy sanctions and is supportive of the broader structure of what they call the Bolivarian Revolution, which has used oil wealth to benefit the population and the
Right.
military. I mean, the military prior to Chavez was just sort of a neo-colonial military. It was not as formidable. So why would you or anyone around you have thought that you could dislodge key leadership in the military? For example, um, the defense minister from this power structure. Like it never made sense to me. It doesn't seem like there's this popular ferment for an armed revolution in which Americans would come in and advise. It seemed more like from an outsider's perspective, you were coming in there with the idea that you and a group of Green Berets could actually fight your way to Caracas.
No, that's again, that is not what the plan was.
I mean, you were grabbed by
You
fishermen,
understand?
so I'm kind of
Yeah,
questioning
no.
the
I
the
think there's a
thinking
lot of
here.
confusion. So I think there's some confusion for you about what the plan was.
I'm talking about the
That initial,
reality versus and how the plan kind of ran up against the hard rocks of reality, which
well,
you
I
may
think
not
the
have
plan
understood.
ran up against, yeah, I think the plan ran up against the hard rocks of the CIA sabotage, right? It's like when you have people in boats who are giving your GPS coordinates, right? It's that this is the reality of it. The people in Venezuela, and it's great to say that, Maduro has a lot of support. He does. That said, there were generals that were very close to him that were not aligned with him, right? This was obviously infiltrated from the beginning. And so I understand that, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it wasn't that hard to sell. Like Maduro was terrified of getting bombed by the US. He was watching these Iranian generals, and I was well placed. I had access to all three of those individuals. And to be perfectly honest, it would have worked fine if we had our link up, because ultimately, back then, the belief near Maduro was that US invasion was imminent or some action was imminent. And so it's not that hard. It's a pretty simple, it's happened several times throughout history. You get access and placement to people around the king, and those people are the ones who do the heavy lifting.
And
It's not,
who were the
secret
generals?
agent. I'm not gonna, these people have families.
So it was said that Alcala's fighters had been infiltrated by Venezuelan intelligence, and that's how they knew you were coming. But you're
Yeah,
saying, let me just clarify something. You said that the
sure.
CIA actually gave up your coordinates.
That's right.
Can you tell me
Absolutely.
more about that?
Yeah. So there was communication between Lester Toledo and George Betancourt's, I guess, their compatriots in the camps. And obviously they're reaching back to DNI, but there were conversations between DNI and men in the camps.
Okay.
So Nicolas Maduro, like the Maduro regime, they didn't have to do anything. They just had to, have their Coast Guard go to the right place at the right time. It wasn't the Maduro regime who infiltrated us. It was the intelligence community of, Venezuela opposition slash CIA.
Okay. And why did they want to sell you out? Because they did not like Alcala and they wanted to be the ones leading the operation down the road? Or
I
was
mean,
there
maybe
another
at the
reason?
tat, I think maybe at the tactical level for the Venezuelans, but they were getting a lot of money back then through USAID. I mean, billions. And this is evidenced by the lawsuit that's going on right now with Juan Guaido in Delaware. So the CIA obviously has other interests. They were not interested in removing Maduro. They were more than happy to drag their feet. They didn't want to. Closing the embassy, Mike Pompeo, I mean, basically made it impossible to close the embassy or it made it impossible for the CIA to operate out of Caracas, which is typically how something like that would be done. They
Yeah.
would have done the exact same thing I did. If the CIA was going to flip the country, they would have done exactly what I did. They would have gotten close to, generals close to Maduro, Cabello, Tariq. Do you understand? Like
I
as
mean, my
harebrained as
understanding
that.
is they tried to do that. Many Venezuelan officials have come
They
out and
didn't.
said that they were offered loads of money to flip. I've interviewed one who said his family was being blackmailed to get him to flip.
Yeah,
Venezuelan generals, some of them have flipped. So this was going on. But you're saying
it
that
was.
but what was missing from the CIA's plan, or did they not actually seek regime change at that point?
They absolutely did not seek regime change. I mean, this is evidenced by the fact that the embassy was closed down. And so because they weren't seeking regime change, I mean that why else would the president or the, president's inner circle come to me? So what I'm telling you, like the plan that I came up with, I didn't come up with it. This has had a long history of um, use over the last, whatever, decades. It's pretty simple. You get people close to the king and you have them do the work. It's their country. That said, the CIA was never interested in regime change. And if you look at kind of what's happening now in the news, I don't know that they are now, right? And so what is incentivizing them at the highest level? Well, they obviously have some sort of um, apparatus, whether it's the drug trade or whatever. I mean, there's a reason they don't want to facilitate change in Venezuela, unless now they are aligned with the Trump administration, which I'm not sure.
Well, there's been competing factions. I mean, you can see it play out through the conflict between Rick Grenell, who wants to negotiate with Venezuela and reap, oil deals with the U.S. The New York Times reported Venezuela was willing to give up contracts with China and Russia in exchange for better relations with the U.S. And then you have Marco Rubio representing South Florida, who wants to go for the full regime change and it seems to be using the drug war as cover. They're escalating from attacking fishing boats, many of them heading to Trinidad and Tobago, supposedly with cocaine, basically extrajudicially executing alleged drug traffickers on the high seas, to Donald Trump's pledge at Quantico to attack Venezuela on land, supposedly to attack cartels, who they now identify as narco terrorists. They're using a sort of terrorism designation. So this really does signal a major escalation. It's said that Grenell is isolated and Rubio's basically taken charge of the policy. And Maria Corina Machado is supposed to be the US asset that will come into power after Maduro and grant quote unquote democracy slash contracts to Trump connected businessmen on the day after she just got the Nobel Peace Prize. Um, what are your thoughts on this whole operation? Does this make sense to you? And are they really aiming at installing Maria Corina Machado? I guess I'm just generally seeking your thoughts on it.
I mean, listen, that briefs really well. Um, but to be perfectly honest, the only reason my plan would have worked is because of the connections that I developed close to the Maduro camp, and Cabello and Tariq. Um, if that is not done and that is not established, then it's invasion.
Yeah.
It's invasion. There's nothing else. So,
And then it would be just a bloodbath and another migration wave to the north.
right. And how do you justify that, right? Like, how do you justify a country invading a much smaller country, much weaker country? Although we did it in Iraq, Afghanistan, and we went there for the resources too. Um, but
And you participated in both of those wars. And you saw
sure.
you felt the moral injury, presumably, of those wars.
So I think it's there's several merits to I'm a soldier, right? So at the strategic level, or sorry, the tactical level, I understand that the certain component of the United States is always going to look down on soldiers. I totally get that. But at the end of the day, we're really the only people who are going to defend this country against anybody. And so as a soldier, we go where we're sent and we win where we fight. Um, to disparage a soldier is um, it's easy to do that in a time of peace or when we're when we're taking part in actions that aren't popular. Obviously, with Iraq, we were there too long. In Afghanistan, we were there way too long, right? One of my old units, so 5th Special Forces Group, we won Afghanistan in 6 weeks. We teamed up with the Northern Alliance and we actually decimated the enemy. Um, that said, we moved in after the fact in order to facilitate big business and large contracts. But what remains are the soldiers. We still have to fight and we still have to defend and fight side by side and protect each other, no matter how demonized we are by certain American people. I much see Venezuela in a similar light. So you have told me that you have met with some of these men and whatnot, but so have I. One of the individuals I met was tortured for 2 years. Another individual I met, who was a captain, he was tortured as well for much longer. And so when you tell me that, well, that Nicolas Maduro and the regime, they're kind of the good guys, I have to be honest with you. There's really no good guys in this. The Maduro regime is a very brutal dictatorship. The opposition government are equally, if not more brutal. And in my estimation, it's really the people who I was seeking to help and defend when I decided to do this initiative. And the way I did that, obviously, was to remove all of the bad actors from the equation. Um, Maduro being one of them, but also, uh, obviously, I had to work with Guaido, but he was not trusted and he was not liked. I do the best I can, right? And that's what I tried to do with Venezuela. I do not think it was at all harebrained. I think you are completely misunderstanding the intent of the operation. It is nuanced, but I do think nowadays, I I don't know how anybody can trust the fact that Maria Corina is in any way illegitimate. I think the elections in Venezuela have to be completely discounted. I think there has to be a separate entity that provides fair and free elections. And I think that outside of all the opposition, all of these parties need to be younger leadership that step forward and actually take center stage if there's going to be any kind of true, um, you know, freedom in Venezuela. Um,
Well, why do you think Maria Corina Machado is not legitimate? Because she's been involved in coups and uh, potentially violent activity and has used undemocratic means to unseat the government, or is there another reason?
Correct. No, correct. And I think that when you look at Leopoldo Lopez and Juan Guaido and all of these groups, any of the opposition, Capriles, all of them, I, how do you, as a Trump administration, even if you do bring about regime change, let's say the CIA gets what they tried to get, what I got, which is access and placement at the highest levels, and somehow forcing Maduro out. Great. Then what? What's the power vacuum? How do you fill that power void? Because I'm here to tell you, if you don't, and I had planned for this, but if you don't fill that power void, then there's going to be civil war. There's going to be blood in the streets. And this is what I initially wanted to hope to avoid. Um,
No, I agree completely. I mean, they
how
would
does that
have to purge Chavismo, which means millions of people who have an organized social structure would have to be purged from society fairly violently. And these are armed. Many of them are armed for self-defense. So I don't see how you avoid an internal bloodbath or a massive migration wave if you just go ahead with an invasion. So I agree completely with you about that. Just in closing, what can you tell us about your prosecution and upcoming trial? And
Well, listen, I would love to be able to get to trial. That would be amazing.
yeah, well,
Hold
what's
on a second.
happening instead?
It is lawfare. I mean, for an administration that's kind of hell bent on. Hold on a sec, Max. This thing's kind of acting. Sorry. Oh, wait. I have to try. There we go. Sorry. Yeah. So for an administration that is ran on the fact that we're going to fight lawfare and we're going to go after weaponization of the federal government. Seems like I'm being weaponized against pretty heavily. This is a political prosecution. It's pretty obvious. I think that like I said, I would love to get to trial. That would be amazing if I could stay on the outside and be able to um, strategize with my lawyers. But the reality is, the prosecutors are working incredibly hard and to put me back in jail, and they want me behind bars so that I don't get access to classified information. There's a ton of it. Obviously, if they put me in jail right now, it would be me fighting to get classified information for years and years and years, forcing myself to stay in jail. So I'd rather stay out of jail and just force them to give me classified information, which it's taken, oh, I don't know, over a year to get just discovery that is not classified. So there was obvious government involvement here, and um, I don't know. Let's see your cards. I'm ready to go to trial.
Well, we will definitely be following up with you, and particularly if you go to trial and manage to obtain classified info, which will presumably corroborate and confirm many of the claims you've made to me about high-level Trump administration and US intelligence involvement in this plot. Is there
Yeah.
anything else you want to add before we close?
Yeah, I think that I don't really have to tell you about it, Max. It's in the discovery. You can read about it.
Well, we'll be publishing that discovery at the Grayzone and featuring it right here. So Jordan Goudreau, former Green Beret and the face of Operation Gideon, thanks so much for joining us at the Grayzone.
Cool. Thanks, Max.